Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Martha Simmons with another session of Preaching and Preachers on Facebook Live via Restream. Good afternoon. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. Good afternoon. I hope everything is all set up and working well. I can see that we are broadcasting on YouTube. Okay, let's see what's going on. Okay, there we go. People are coming in. People are coming in. You always have to check with this technology because it will put you on three platforms and not the platform you want to be on at the time. It actually does all of that. But people are coming in. And when you come in, type in the name of another person who you know needs to view this broadcast. They can view it right now. They can jump on, or it'll be up for 2 weeks. They can check it out in their leisure. Come on in. Come on in. Let me know that you are out there. Good afternoon to my people on the East Coast. Hey to my people on the West Coast. I know a couple of sisters who told me from the West Coast that they were definitely not missing this one. So, hey to you all, and a shout out to my people everywhere else in the country. It's a sunny day here in Atlanta after a whole bunch of rain and stormy like stuff yesterday, but it's looking good today, and we've got a broadcast for you. I've got two guests today. Two guests. I'm trying to bring as much information to folk as I can, trying to get on as many guests as I can. And we're going to go ahead and get started since we do have two. And as people come on, like I said, when you come in, type in the name of another person who you know needs to view this broadcast. As always, I'm praying for those who are sick, praying for those who are experiencing a season of bereavement, praying for people who are starving in the Sudan, and for those who are dying in Gaza. And thank you to all of those who are participating in efforts to help in both instances. Thank you for doing that. Two quick announcements. Number one, join the Women of Color in Ministry broadcast this Friday, April 26th at 8 p.m. on their page, not my page, but their page, the Women of Color in Ministry page, as they talk about weaving diversity into mainline ministries. We know that so much is happening in the country, and that diversity is the issue of our time. And our churches are going to be more diverse than they are now. And so these sisters are already in the middle of that. They know how to do it. They know how to talk about diversity. They know what it means for Black folk. So join them Friday, April 26th at 8 o'clock on the Women of Color in Ministry page. And then next Monday, April 29th, I'm going to be talking about developing sermons, how to develop sermons for this era. You know, every era has its own sound. And so you need to develop sermons accordingly. And I've got three of the best helping me do it. Dr. Rahiel Letzer, Dr. Jerry Carter of the How Shall They Hear Conference, and Dr. Charles Goodman, who pastors a megachurch in Augusta, Georgia, and has satellite campuses as well. So join me for the 29th. Let's get to today's broadcast. I am so excited about having today's guest, and she's going to talk about women in the academy, how they can increase their earnings, their visibility, and those kinds of things. Dr. Monica Coleman, the Dr. Monica Coleman, is the John and Patricia Cochran Scholar for Inclusive Excellence and Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's earned degrees from Harvard University, Vanderbilt University, and Claremont Graduate University. She's an ordained minister, in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and she's an initiate in traditional Yoruba religion. She's the author of 6 books. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, was the first book I read by her, shares her lifelong dance with trauma and depression and how she discovered a new and liberating vision of God. That is an amazing book. It's a classic now. If you don't have it, you want to get it. Her other book, that's also somewhere on my shelf, is Making a Way Out of No Way. And it's in seminaries every place. You put it on your syllabi. It's just one of those kinds of books that men and women need to know about. Today, though, she is here to talk about AB3, Apple Boy 3. The website is https blackacademicbraintrust.com, and she has a podcast. There's a podcast that goes with it that she does with someone else, and she's going to tell us all about it. Plus, she has an exciting an announcement that I just mentioned something and she made it happen, and I am just so delighted to have her here. Good afternoon, Dr. Coleman.
Good afternoon, Dr. Simmons. It's good to be here.
It is great to have you finally on the broadcast. Let's get right to it. Because like I told everybody, I have 2 guests today. I have 2 guests coming on. First, so tell people, what's this AB3, Academic Business and Branding Brain Trust? What's that all about?
Well, that's exactly it, right? Academic Business and Branding Brain Trust. It's an initiative I run with my very good friend and colleague and business partner, Takia Noor Amin, who's at Virginia Tech University right now. And it is for Black academic women who want to share their knowledge with the world. And most of us have knowledge, right? We've gone through all the paces, we have all the degrees, and most of us want to share it with more than the 15 to 30 people sitting in our classrooms. And
Right.
so we talk about how to do that and how to monetize that and how to be vision led in the ways in which we help Black academic women build or strengthen or grow their businesses so that they can share their knowledge with the world.
All right. All right. All right. So, we know you as a scholar. So how did you get into this? Is a business, real business focused kind of adventure. How did you get into wanting to help women scholars? How'd that happen?
Well, there's something I did for myself, which is actually a
Hmm.
clergy story. And I've told you about this before. When my first book, The Dina Project, came out in 2004, my godmother, my aunt, just thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. And she told everybody, you have to have my niece come speak. You have to have
Mhm.
my niece come speak. And so I'm preaching at all these people's churches and didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what
Mhm.
kind of honoraria to ask for. I didn't know, like, do I need to make sure I have a parking spot? Like, right? I wasn't trying to have a rider with green M&Ms, but I realized I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was doing this a lot.
Mhm.
And, you know, I was making a little bit of money, but I just felt really unorganized. And
Mhm.
so I started putting together contracts and talking to people about public speaking and professional speaking, because that's really what it had turned into, right? I'm selling
Mhm.
books, I'm up there preaching, and I wanted to kind of formalize that a bit more. And as maybe a couple years, maybe some years after that, 4 or 5 years after that, I inked myself. And
Mhm.
I inked myself in part because the US government was not kind to people, but was kinder to corporations.
I know that's right.
And I said, I'm working hard out here and I don't sell green golf balls. I have ideas. I
Mhm.
have my knowledge, my information, and they're taking too much of this, the percentage of what
Mhm.
I make. And so I
Mhm.
inked myself so I could, in a legal way, keep the majority of what I was laboring to make.
Mhm.
And
Right.
as I did that, I created, other kind of marketing projects. I had other initiatives. As some of you know, I sell a process theology course and teach process theology to the masses. I have some Lenten resources and wanted to have a good structure for that. And then I realized people were asking me, and Takia tells a very similar story. She's a different kind of business. But people said, "What do you do? How do you do that? How do you decide when to go preach and when not to go preach?"
Mm-hmm.
And I would just kind of talk about it. You're in the hallways, in the bathrooms, just at a conference on the side. And so we decided to formalize the kind of
Mm-hmm.
information we were sharing, and also to formalize the kind of resources we share. You don't want to just jump online and feel like, who can do this for me? So we
Right.
also do a lot of vetted references, right? So that we give really great resources, and most of whom are women of color. Um,
Right.
make sure we keep our money circulating in our community. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to help, everything from taxes to web design, all the kinds of things that a person might need.
So you all, I want you to be clear because people are always inboxing me, calling me, emailing me for these kinds of resources for scholars. And this sister and her partner, they have put it together for you. Okay. So you got a place where you can understand speaking contracts and all kinds of things. Like I said, it's not about whether you got a writer, like she said, a writer asking for green M&Ms, but it is about getting paid properly for the work that you do. Selling ideas, giving people ideas, that is hard work. That's hard work. And sisters have never gotten paid in the academy what men have gotten paid. And that hasn't changed. It's better, but it really hasn't changed. So we need all of the ways that we can get to allow our money to flourish for us and our communities. So they have a list of any and everybody, how to set up your website, the accountants you need, what your documents should look like for a lecture engagement. They have done all of this work. And I've always done it piecemeal because it was never really a main focus for me. It is a main focus for these sisters. And from now on, anybody who calls, texts, emails me, they will be forwarded. So tell us more now. This is for something you've done for academic women through AB3. Tell us more about what you really do for, let's say, a sister emails you today or texts you today or comes on your website today. What will you tell them you can do for them? Let's say that they are a theologian and they've been teaching in a school for 4 years, just put their first book out. What kinds of things could you offer them?
Well, we've had clients just like that, right? We've had religious scholars as clients and those outside of religion as well. And we say sign up for our next cohort. We run in a cohort model so people have community, right? So it's not just you working on this by yourself, which is hard. We want people to have community. We're running an intensive cohort this summer, and I can tell you more about that at the end. We're used to giving knowledge away for free. So the first thing we say
Mhm.
is stop that.
Stop that.
Stop doing it, right? Don't speak for free, don't Zoom for free, don't do it because
Mhm,
we shouldn't, right? And
mhm,
we don't have to. And so some of the things is changing that mindset around, well, we're excited about it, we know it, so of course we're going to share it. Yes, we
mhm.
are going to share it for a fee. So we kind of begin talking about that. And everyone, especially Black women, have complex relationships with money. So that's
Yeah.
one of the first things we're going to talk about, and getting ourselves used to that sense of we're going to ask for things. We're going to say this is our fee. Depending on who you are, what you're doing, what you're going to do differs, right? If you're going to teach, if you're going to speak, if you're going to do consulting, if you're going to do all of those kinds of things, right? If you're
Mhm,
going to self-publish, like there are many options of what people do, but we want to kind of build our own world that's a world you want to live in. So we're very vision led. Anybody can monetize anything, but we operate by a sense of calling. And we
mhm.
really like to help other people think about, what is your vocation? What is the sense of calling that drives you? Because the details might look different over time, right? Nobody was streaming anything, right? 5 years ago,
That's
10 years,
right. That's
right?
right.
So what your product might be might change, but your vision, what you care about, what you know, right? The way in which you want to transform the world. We really are vision led in the way in which we begin helping the clients that we work with. And then after that, we want a good foundation from the beginning. So we talk about money and taxes and business structure before we get to sexy stuff like branding
Mhm.
and marketing, because we want people to have a really good foundation.
Right.
And if you have that good foundation, you have the option, if you are in a toxic work environment, to say, no, I'm not going to do that, because
Mhm.
you have your own business that can perhaps, right, fund your life and do what you need it to do. So for some
Right.
people, it's a part-time job, right, of the businesses. But if you set the structure up right, you can flip it into a full-time anytime that you need to. So we really talk about that part. And then we talk about, branding and marketing and products and how to do those without being sleazy, because we don't, one of us want to feel that way.
Mhm.
But we still, and there are all types of ways people do it. Some of it's personality based, some of it's
Yes.
based on your capacity, and some of it is based on what product you have, right?
Right.
So, a woman with young children might not be doing the same thing as somebody whose kids have gone off to college, and you have
Uh-huh.
a different kind of time and travel capabilities, as an example. So we talk, we work individually with each person and talk about, what is it you're working with? What are you working on? And support, Black academic women in making their business dreams come true.
All right. And please be clear that this is not just for women in religion. This is for any women, all women
Correct.
in the academy. If you are on right now listening to me and Dr. Coleman, type in the names, type in those names. You may not personally need this information, but you know women in the academy who teach something, or women who are on their way to teaching who need this. Type in those names so that this will be up for 2 weeks so that they can view it. Okay. That's one of the ways that we help each other get the word out. Type in the names. It doesn't cost you anything. Just start typing names. And what I've learned is that people will type in one name and it may not be specifically for that person, and they will pass it on to something else. So let's start typing in names right now as you are watching. So, Dr. Coleman, I recommend people and companies on this broadcast, but I don't do it a lot. Okay, after 7 years, I've learned some lessons. And I only recommend, and trust me, there are folk all the time who they want to get recommended, but I haven't been able to find good ways of vetting them. And they may be great, or they may think they're great, but I couldn't vet them and say this person is reputable. I vetted your stuff. I know through two other women it is reputable. That said, what are some benchmarks or metrics that you use to measure your services? Uh, I tell people that when they get particular services from me, here's what I guarantee. Here's what I guarantee. Here's what I can't guarantee. All right. What can you all guarantee?
Well, we can definitely guarantee the information that you're going to get, that you're going to now have all the tools you need, right? Some people might implement them a couple weeks later or a couple months later, depending on what their schedules look like. And they have access to all those materials for quite a while after the live sessions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Or people might do it right then. And so we know that you're going to have all the tools you need. So you can't say, oh, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure what the next step is. So we
Mm-hmm.
lay out very clearly what those steps are, and we have a blueprint for how to do that. Um, we're both Dr. Takia and I are humanities people. So
Mm-hmm.
even though we've worked with people in STEM, we've worked with people who are in social sciences as well as humanities. So I think we're really moved when we hear from our clients how they're doing, right? That
Yeah.
they've raised their prices, that people are paying their raised prices, which we always knew would happen. One person we worked with, and within 24 hours, she had over $1,000 in additional monthly income,
Yeah.
right? And just doing something that she was already passionate about, right? And so some of it is, will help you work through the tech. That's stuff I love to do, right?
Mhm.
Will help you kind of know how to work with consultants, which is really Dr. Takia's strength, right? So sometimes it's like it's the nuts and bolts of something, and we'll literally walk someone through it. But when someone comes back and says, "Oh, I made this decision based on working with you," or "This is how my business is going," or we can, I mean, people have to tell us because we don't know your numbers. But if
Mhm.
somebody tells us, and people usually do, then that really is really rewarding for us. That's what brings us joy.
Mhm. Okay, tell listeners about the big thing. You all operate in cohort models. First of all, tell us about the next cohort for us women scholars, and then tell us about what you are now going to be doing for women in ministry.
So we normally run our cohorts in 6 weeks because in that's it's a program that can be a 6 week program. And we
Mhm.
do that in the fall and spring semesters because we're academics and we think in terms of semesters. But in the summer we run an intensive.
Mhm.
So most of us have less teaching responsibilities and we have the time to dig right in. And so we're running a cohort from July 7th to July 14th, right? Every single day we'll be with you. We'll be talking with you. We don't give homework because nobody needs homework. We give
Right.
suggestions for action assignments.
Mhm.
But if you don't do it, nothing happens to you. Nothing is graded, but there is feedback, right? And
Mhm.
there's a way in which we talk and answer questions and do that kind of thing. But we run it really intensively. So it's almost like summer camp, boot camp, but the kind that you want to be in. So our
Okay.
next cohort for Black academic women, and we work with those who are not Black academic women, as long as
Mhm.
you're good with the centering of Black
Right.
academic women, right? You have to be good with Black women being at the center of our conversations and how we work. And you can see some of that in our FAQs. But yes, July 7th to July 14th, every single day, you can find us. And you can just apply. You go to our website, blackacademicbraintrust.com, blackacademicbraintrust.com, or anywhere you can track me down online, you can find it. And there's a button to hit apply.
Okay, Black Academic Brain Trust
Yes.
.com,
Yes.
and tell us now what you're gonna be doing for women in ministry.
After a great conversation with you, and the reminder that I started my own business off because of the work I was doing as clergy. We
Mhm.
decided to run one for senior clergy women. And so this is our pilot because we haven't done this. Of course, there are clergy who are in the academy. We have
Mhm.
definitely worked with clergy. I see some of them are on right now. So I
Yeah.
know that there are other clergy we've worked with, but we're going to do one just for clergy women, whether you are or not in the academy, for senior clergy women. And that will be another intensive July 14th through July 21st. So,
July 14th through July 21st. Somebody put that in the chat. You do
and
not want to
the
miss
right.
this.
And the
And
way to
then,
find out about it and get more information is to go to bit.ly/AB3clergy. And
okay,
I'll put it
and
in
you
that when I get a chance. But
thank you.
bit.ly
And you all don't want to miss this in
AB3 clergy.
women and then turn around and send 10 emails and 10 texts to the Women of Color in Ministry Project saying you need this help. Where can you get it?
Right.
Okay.
And if you
This
miss
is
it,
an
you can always
investment.
find me. I am easy to find online. I'm on every
Mhm.
platform except for TikTok,
Yeah.
because I'm too old for it personally. But every other platform you can find me on. If you can't remember, just ask me and I'll get you all the information you need.
Yeah, or you can you can send an email to the Women of Color. You can text us. We will also get you the information. July 14th through the 21st. If you are clergy, if you are a woman preacher and you're trying to figure out how can I do better branding, how can I get better speaker fees, how can I get organized
Yeah.
about what I know God has called me to do, this is the cohort for you. This is the cohort for you. I promise you that you will get your money's worth. You will meet people who can help you move things ahead. Too many of you got all the goods, okay? And you're not out there. And sometimes I see you all on Facebook, y'all mad because they don't call you to preach. Y'all mad. They didn't call me because my church is small. They don't da da da. Stop all of that and just get out there and get what you need for this moment. There's a new way of doing things. Don't let people tell you you shouldn't be paid. Don't let people tell you that women ought to be humble and accept less, all of that craziness. Okay.
Right.
Dr. Coleman and her partner, they will help you put together what you need. Okay. The Bitly address is now. It's in the chat. You can see it. July 14th through 21st for clergy women.
Yes.
That one's for clergy women. Okay. And hopefully they will be doing them in the future. I'm going to keep pushing it because I know that it can take a minute to get sisters to believe that they ought to try something dramatically new. Okay. So we will be pushing that. Dr. Coleman, just before you go, are there other resources, anything else you want to share with listeners about the Black Academic Brain Trust?
Well, a big part of it is that we know that we all have hopes and dreams and visions and passions, and most of us are too interesting or too large for the job that employs us. And that's
Mm-hmm,
not horrible. I mean, job is a job, right? It can't be
mm-hmm,
everything, but you
mm-hmm,
still have a way you want to live that out into the world. And so that's one thing that we really care about is how can you take all the things that excite you, that enliven you, that you have passion for, and that you are certifiably knowledgeable, right? That you know, and share
mm-hmm.
that with the world. So we're definitely interested and going to make sure you get paid and we care about the business. But really, our first priority is for people to take the things that they absolutely love and have a
Mm-hmm.
way to share that with the wider world, because that's how we change the world. And
Exactly.
we bring, taking our skills to a wider place and then making sure we can also take care of our families, take care of ourselves, and go on
Mhm.
vacation.
There you go.
Those
There
things
you go.
cost money.
All of it costs money. Okay, it costs money. Dr. Coleman, I can't thank you enough, especially for coming up with the Women in Ministry cohort in July and for all that you do and for your writings across the year. Again, Bipolar Faith is an extraordinary book, but you already know that. Thank you for your other work across the years on mental health and just helping sisters and helping everybody better understand how you navigate mental health and wholeness and wellness and faith. God bless you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It is an honor and a joy. And I'll keep adding some links to the chat so people can find us.
Thank you so much. All right. All right. So we had Dr. Coleman, and now we're going to switch to our second guest. Our second guest is going to talk about her new book. Her new book. Her new book. We're going to get right to it. And Dr. Coleman is just sticking around because she's supportive.
Oh,
That's just what she does. That's just what she does. Um, my second guest. I told you all this was a jam-packed hour, and I'm telling you, I'm excited. Dr. Coleman is not only important to me, my second guest is extremely important to me. She is a freedom fighter, and I've been watching her for a long time, um, out here just doing the work that others were not doing, and she was doing it with a fierceness,
hmm.
and that's what attracted me to her. Let me introduce you to her. Reverend Rahiel Tesfamariam is the author of the new book. Imagine, let me see. Okay. Y'all know how my bookshelf is looking like it's falling down all the time, but I actually know where everything is. Imagine freedom. That's the new book. I've read it, and she's gonna talk to us about it. Reverend Rahiel Tesfamariam is an award-winning activist, journalist, theologian, and international speaker. She's a former columnist for the Washington Post. She's the founder of Urban Cusp, and that's Cusp. That's where I first heard about her. which is a cutting edge online community highlighting faith, social change, cultural, and global awareness. She served as a young adult pastor in DC. She is a graduate of Stanford University and Yale Divinity School, where she was the inaugural William Sloan Coffin, Junior Scholar for Peace and Justice. She's got over 2 decades. She don't look like it, okay? She still got that young look. 2 decades of organizing experience with national and international social justice for efforts. For years, she worked in Africa, organizing with Pan-African movements across the continent. As a generational voice, she's been featured all over the place. New York Times, Forbes, Ebony, Elle, BET. She's been everywhere. But today, I want to talk to her about her debut book, Imagine Freedom: Transforming Pain into Political and Spiritual Power. And it's available wherever books are sold. I just saw her, like she was on Roland Martin. She was with Michael Eric Dyson somewhere else. She's been all over the place talking to this about this book. And I'm glad to have her here today. Welcome, Rahiel.
Thank you for having me. This is an absolute pleasure. I watch your videos all the time, so it's awesome to finally be in conversation with you.
Okay, let's get right to it. Tell us, you have such a fascinating story, well, it fascinated me, about being born in Africa and then becoming an American citizen. Tell us a bit about your story.
So I was born on a continent in the Horn of Africa, in Asmara, Eritrea, when Eritrea was fully immersed in war with Ethiopia. And my father passed away when I was 4 years old, leaving my mom a widow of 8. And so she had that reality of figuring out what survival was going to look like after our family patriarch was gone. And so my brother, who was the eldest male, went off to war to fight in the Liberation Front. And then eventually my sister left also. And they actually were in the opposing liberation fronts of my country. And so both of them had left by the time my mom was pregnant with me. And so they got refugee status. In Sudan, they were refugees, and then ultimately they got political asylum to the United States under the Reagan administration. I came to the United States on a 6-month visa for my sister's wedding. And that was my entry point into the United States. My mom said, because now that her father is gone, she is my baby. I cannot come without her. So they said, bring her. And I was supposed to be a flower girl in that wedding in return. And my family tells me that I refused to return. And they bought a one-way ticket and everything. And I did not return to the continent until 19 years later. And so I was undocumented in the United States for 10 years, navigating the public school system in the South Bronx and Washington, D.C. And it wasn't until I was 14 and my sister basically adopted me that I was able to get a green card. So once she got citizenship, she essentially ensured that the immigration status of her entire family was secured. And so she adopted me as her daughter, and that's how I became legal in the United States and got my green card. I didn't become a U.S. citizen until I was a senior at Stanford University.
Okay. All right. Yeah. My God. What a journey.
So that story of war, of immigration, of liberation, of African countries at war with one another, with the West literally controlling us like puppets, all those things define who I am and define my work and define why Imagine Freedom exists today.
Yeah. Along with a family that believed in family, and your sister who just said, we're family, everybody's going to get taken care of. What an amazing story. All right, with all of that said, especially as you talk about uh, the U.S.'s role in so much of what has happened on the continent, your family, your whole journey. Tell me, so why'd you write this book?
Whew, I mean, I think I was in in first. I'm trying to remember second grade when the Black teachers in my life empowered me to know that my voice was powerful. Second
Mm,
grade,
yeah.
they gave me a pen, and literally, I think discovering a pen was the greatest thing that may have ever happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were a lot of ways in which I was powerless, and my
Mm,
life was designed for me to be eternally powerless.
mm-hmm.
Being African, being a woman, being an immigrant, like everything was stacked against me. Coming to this country, not speaking a word of English, right?
Mm,
And I understood education as the pathway to liberation.
mm,
At that time, that was the only way out, and the power of the written and the spoken word. I have used it my entire life to get me out of poverty, and also to sustain my psychological and emotional and spiritual well-being when I was going through hell at different points in
mm,
my life. It was
mm-hmm.
it was the journaling, it was the poetry, it was the writing that gave me hope. And so
Mm,
there's a way in which I know the power of the written and the spoken word. And I was in third grade, and another Black teacher of mine used to put me in oratorical contests, and
yeah.
I would recite the speeches of Frederick Douglass and King. So that was my whole entire upbringing, is me navigating power
Mm-hmm.
as a little girl with no power,
Yeah.
by knowing that the way that I spoke and the words that I wrote down made a difference in the world. So there was no way that I knew I could leave this earth without writing a book. The question
Mm,
was just going to be, what was that book going to be about, right?
yeah.
And it was over a 10-year journey of trying to figure it out. Sometimes it was going to be about fear. Sometimes it was going to be about activism. I mean, I went through a journey of figuring out what was that first book. And I ultimately got to a place where I thought, you know what? Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's about trauma, because one
Whoa.
thing I'm clear about is pain. One
Mm-hmm.
thing I'm clear about that I've been through and that I've witnessed other people and communities of people go through in all my travels all over the world is this common thread of pain. And I remember just thinking, but what's on the other side of pain? There
My
has to be
goodness.
something on the other side of pain. We can't just stop at pain and trauma. And
Thank you.
I read Bell Hooks All About Love, and I remember thinking, what if I wrote a book all about freedom?
All right now.
What if I wrote a book all about freedom? And so imagine freedom was birthed out of that desire to literally dissect freedom. Yeah, and I broke it up into 3 parts to reflect the children of Israel moving from a site of trauma, Egypt, to the wilderness, a site of rebellion, finally to the promised land, a site of divine fulfillment. So the book takes you on a healing and freedom journey.
All right now. All right. So, what if you wrote about trauma and then about freedom? So, the book is entitled Imagine Freedom. What does that mean? You're a preacher. What
Mhm.
does it mean for Black preachers personally and professionally, especially, as they're putting sermons together, as they're teaching their Bible studies? um what does that mean for them? In other words, what I'm really trying to get at is, because I think we're so lacking this in our pulpits and our churches, how do you teach people to use their imagination? Talk about imagine freedom. How do we get that done?
I mean, I have so much to say about what you're asking me. First, let me start with the fact that you set this up really nicely by calling me a preacher. You know, I have never understood myself as a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is because I had these conceptions in my head of what a preacher looks like, sounds
Mm-hmm.
like, the way they move in the world, what they do on the pulpit, and it didn't look like me. And because
Mm-hmm.
it didn't look like me, I could never see myself as a preacher. Same way that I refused to become Reverend Rahiel, I stayed Minister Rahiel, because I was not comfortable and at peace with the notion of becoming a reverend, because ordination didn't look like me. It didn't look urban. It didn't look countercultural. It didn't look radical, revolutionary, and all the things that I wanted to be, right? So part
Mm-hmm.
of freedom is that we come to a place of self-liberation first. It's
Right.
how we say the first ministry is at home, right? And so we have to imagine ourselves free. We have to name our own bondage. I knew the pulpit was a site of bondage for me. I knew it. I knew if you told me it was a stage, I was liberated. You told me it was a pulpit and I felt enslaved, right? And
Mm,
so there was a way in which I could name my own subjugation. And I
mm-hmm.
had to think, I can't be the only one.
Can't
And there
be.
was can't be. And there's a way in which you could look at your relationships and see them as sites of trauma. You could look at strongholds that looked a lot like love, but they were really demons at work in your life. Like there are ways in which you start connecting the pieces and you say, oh, this ain't just about social justice. This ain't just about politics. This is
Right.
about the fact that we are called to set every captive free. The problem is most of us don't know we're captives, right? So,
Right.
so the idea of imagining freedom is imagining yourself free. Imagine yourself free. But to imagine yourself free, first you have to be able to acknowledge you're in bondage,
That's
and
right.
that's the hardest part. And
Yeah.
part of what starts that work is the unlearning, because we
Mm-hmm.
live in a system, we live in a country that tries to convince us we're free, that tells us that there is a pathway to freedom, and that pathway looks a lot like the oppressor's pathway. And we're
That's right.
trained to follow that pathway. And as long as we follow that pathway, we're safe. But if
Yep.
we divert in any way, we become dangerous, right?
Yes.
And sometimes the more of a threat that you are to America, the greater you are to God, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
greater threat that you become to the enemy, the more useful you are to God. And a lot of us are not useful because we're serving one master and don't know which one it is, right?
My
And so
goodness.
when we talk imagine freedom, I want to see a place in which we strengthen that imagination muscle, because that's the very thing that the enemy comes for.
Mm-hmm.
The mind, the enemy comes for the mind. He came to Eve and spoke to her so that he could reach her mind. And he also camouflaged himself so he could deceive her. It was psychological warfare, not just spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
So when we talk about imagination, we're talking about freeing ourselves from the lies of the enemy, the captivity of the enemy. And the enemy is spiritual, and it's also the state. It's also
Mm-hmm.
media. It's also
Yep.
propaganda. It's not just one enemy, right? And so when we imagine ourselves free, we imagine ourselves free in every realm possible:
Yeah.
political, spiritual, emotional, psychological, so that nothing is still under the hold of the enemy.
My God. My God. First, know that you're in bondage. And if you're black and in this country and you've never said, I'm in bondage, you'll stay in bondage. You will stay in bondage. Be real clear about that. Okay. You can't imagine your freedom until you talk about being in bondage and what that means for your life as an African American in this country, and what it means for the lives of your family and those you love. You got to first name it.
Well, can
Okay.
I just say to that real quick? Because
Yeah.
if we're the body of Christ, let's speak in a language that we all can understand. We're talking about the children of Israel coming out of physical captivity out of Egypt. They're in the
Mm-hmm.
wilderness, so they've escaped Pharaoh, right? They're no longer on the site of trauma, on the site of
Mm-hmm.
bondage. They're actually now under the care of a loving God who's telling them, I'm going to feed you. I'm going to care for you. All you got to do is trust me day by day, right? It's like a woman escaping an abusive relationship and going into a safe house, right? That's what the wilderness was. And what happened? They just kept looking back to Pharaoh and said, but we ate so well under Pharaoh, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a way in which, trauma is seductive. It's
Yes.
very seductive. We develop trauma bonds with the
Mm,
sources of our captivity. And we think it's love. We think it's intimacy. And a lot of what we call intimacy is actually trauma. It's actually
that's right.
oppression. It's actually subjugation. So, what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about is removing Egypt from our minds, even when our
Yeah.
physical bodies have come out of Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And many of us, we look around at our houses, we look at our material things, and we say, I'm free, baby, I'm free. Your mind is captive, sis. I'm sorry. It's your
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the mind. And I look at us across all of these social media platforms and how so often we're keeping ourselves busy, busy, busy. We've got to tell you what we're doing. We got to post. We got to do this, 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 this. And we say we're living okay. And we don't realize the trauma is causing us to overwork, to think we've got to show up in society in certain ways and etc. And we refuse to say that I'm in bondage, but I'm coming out. Okay.
But I mean, Dr. Martha, what did God say? God said,
Mm.
I mean, it's sad, but in some ways, God said this whole entire generation has to die away because
Whoa.
you all can't make it into the promised land, right?
Mm.
What does that tell us?
Mm.
That we might have an entire generation that is not equipped to enter into freedom, right?
Jesus.
And why is that? Because they've learned, embraced, adopted, fallen in love with the ways of Pharaoh. So much
Jesus.
so, and I spoke about this the other day, the allegiances to Pharaoh and not God. And that's the problem. We have conflated, many of us, an allegiance to Pharaoh with our devotion to God. And these are two separate things. See, God demands loyalty.
Yep.
You can't serve God in empire. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so the day comes when God says, choose this day who you will serve.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many who say, I love you, God, but I'm going to stand on the side of empire. And when that day comes, God says, well, you go over there and you stay with Pharaoh. Now, those of you who want to be set free, come on with me. And sometimes that's a whole entire generation that has to die away.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but this country has done a good job of brainwashing with using the government, media, and every tentacle that it could unleash on people. And one of them, of course, a big one, is capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And you speak in the book of how capitalism, this is a part of the bondage, and how people get in bondage and can't get out. You talked about how it depletes us. Say something about that. Speak to capitalism depleting people.
Whew. I mean, I've never really talked about this, but one thing that came to my mind is it's fascinating how when Jesus called the disciples, in many ways, he called them away from their labor. You know, so we knew them as tax collectors, fishermen, all of them served a purpose. And there was a way in which Jesus called all of them out of their labor. And the idea was that your identity is not tied to your work. Your identity is tied to your service to your God, right?
That's right.
And so will you still have value when you're no longer the tax collector?
Yeah.
Will you still know your worth when you're no longer a fisherman, right? And so there's a way in which many of us don't know our sense of worth and value without it being connected to what we do.
Yeah.
Our productivity is what defines us, right? And that is not accidental. It's intentional. It's systematic. It's multi-generational, right? And it traces back centuries and centuries and centuries ago when they told us that we were nothing unless we worked from sun up to sundown. And we have yet to unlearn that. And part of, and I'm not the only one talking about this. Trisha, Hersey, a whole bunch of people. Rest is resistance, right?
It is.
And there's a way in which resistance is not always doing something. Sometimes rest is refusing to allow yourself to be driven by what other people think is important. Maybe for that day, for you, what's most important is stillness. Because we know God is not in the fire. God is not in the earthquake. God is not in the hurricane, the tornado. God is in that gentle, soft blowing, that whisper, right? And there's a way in which we have forgotten who God is and how God shows up. We think that God shows up, through always abundance. It's not always abundance. Sometimes it's solitude. Sometimes it's isolation, right? And so it's depleting us so much so we don't have anything left over for God.
My goodness.
And when we don't have anything left over for God, how powerful are you going to imagine that we will be in spiritual warfare, right? Because if the ultimate battle for Christians is a spiritual one, spiritual warfare, if we are so depleted by work, what do we have left to fight the enemy? What do we have left to bring new disciples into the faith? There's nothing left for God, right? Which means, again, we are not useful to God. We're useful to empire, right? So, I want, and I'm not talking about some place in which I have arrived. I'm talking about my own demons. I'm talking about my own strongholds. I'm talking about my own pursuit of the American dream my entire life. And thinking that as an immigrant, the more and more and more I had, the more value I had. Right. And so I'm speaking to you about my own liberation path, that I, Rahiel, have to believe I have value when I'm sleeping, that I have value when I'm eating, when I'm
Yeah.
praying, and the world doesn't know what I'm doing.
I was telling one of my sons in ministry who asked me what was I doing the other day as I was talking to them by phone. They was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Enjoying talking to you and having a popsicle. Let me finish my popsicle and I'll get back to you." All I wanted was a simple popsicle. And I think that preachers, especially poor Black preachers, preachers who don't have the mega churches, preachers who are just trying to make it, and they have good intentions, but they don't believe that there'll be anybody if they don't have a church, if they don't have a title. From it used to be minister was good, then reverend was good, then you had to be doctor. Now
Reverend
you have
doctor,
to be
right?
right. Now you have to be doctor, then you had to be bishop, then you had to be super apostle, etc. All of
I'm so glad you named that. I'm so
good
glad you said that.
gracious. I
Yes.
mean, my heart gets broken.
Yes.
My heart gets broken because I can see that these are people who don't feel seen and they're in bondage, but they're not naming it. And instead, they're fighting. Who was it that fought the windmills? They're fighting windmills, okay? Trying to deal with that trauma of not being seen, not being heard, not being loved. And capitalism says if you attach a title on it, you moved up further. Okay?
Yeah.
You moved up further. That's what the titles are about. Even the fake titles, that people go on the internet and buy. They'll take a fake title, in their attempts to move up. And it's all fake. But it's the trauma that leads to that. So, talking about freedom, talking about getting out of the trauma and dealing with what it means to be in your wilderness moments and to ultimately get to your promised land. This election is such a pivotal moment in the history of this country for 50 million different reasons that I'm not trying to go into, but everybody basically knows. Talking about imagining freedom and having political and spiritual power. Okay. What are your thoughts about this moment for the church and for Black folk everywhere? What is this moment like and mean for us?
I'm trying to survive this moment of my allergies, but I need to always keep my cough drops. So anyway, I swear the enemy comes to me through my voice and my throat, because that's the very thing I need.
I've been there.
I know. So this is one of the worst elections ever. Ever. It's horrible. And it's horrible because we don't have to talk about Trump. We know who Trump is. We know the threat of Trump. We know how dangerous Trump is. And there's some people ridiculous enough to try to suggest that I'm even advocating that we vote for Trump. It's ridiculous, right? But so we know that demon. We know that devil. But let's talk about Biden. And I think I've learned a lot from Biden. I mean, in some ways, it was Biden who made me sit there and research what is a gaslighter. What is a narcissist? Because we use these terms, and then I had to stop going with the cultural flow of just using these terms as action words or moments, to understanding that they are not. They are psychological ways of moving in the world. They are personality disorders.
That's right.
And you can literally understand why somebody does what they do through this lens of what it means to be a gaslighter. I am convinced. I am not a doctor. I am not trained. But from what I have read and from what I see through a spiritual lens, Biden is dangerous. He's very dangerous. And he's actually, in some ways, a reflection of the danger in our lives, of how people come in that we trust, that we make ourselves vulnerable to, that we have intimate relationships with. And they are the ones who are most dangerous because they seduce us into connection, into relationship, only to reveal who they really are once they've gained power.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way in which you could argue he has seduced the Black community for decades.
Yeah.
Because he always wanted this. And he knew who to be and how to move in the world the same way that Clinton knew to get on Arsenio Hall show and have a saxophone. They have always known how to seduce the Black community. But what is interesting that we've seen in Biden is these categorical differences between who he said he was and who he is right now. We never thought that the impact would be the one signing off on genocide, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a horrible election. And
Yeah.
so I'm not here to tell anybody who to vote for. That's between you, the booth, and your God, right? We all got to work our voting out with fear and trembling. I believe that. But I do think that the abusive relationship that we are in is not just with Trump and Biden, but it's with America as a whole.
That's what it is.
It's with America. That's what
it.
this moment proves.
Yeah.
That yes, we are in an abusive, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, and politically abusive relationship that we must get out of, that we must protect our children and future generations from. And so what do we have to do today to create an exit strategy where we and our children and their children will not suffer the abuse that we're undergoing today, and that the global community will not continue to suffer at the hands of America, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I believe this moment calls for.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that needs to happen for the world in terms of America and its partnerships and participation in genocide that continues every day somewhere on the planet. So it is a critical election. But I want to say to people, and this is my belief, this is me speaking for me, Biden is participating in the genocide that's happening in Gaza and in other places.
Yes.
And Donald Trump, I believe, is Mr. Genocide. I believe he is Mr. Genocide. And I believe him when he says he wants to tear down everything and start over. And everything. And so as much as we think we know about him, I don't think people really know what Act 2 is about, because they didn't believe them. First of all, people didn't believe he would win, but they also didn't believe Stephen Miller and others when they said, we're going to tear it all down. Now, of course, they have nothing to replace it with, right? You could even have a dialogue with me if you said, oh, I want to replace A with B. There's nothing to replace it with, okay? There's nothing to replace it with, because for this man, it's all about vengeance and pride. Vengeance and pride, not skill, okay? So I don't really, I'm certainly not on here telling people who to vote for. That's not my job. I am saying that this election is critical. It is critical. And, as someone who's always voted, next one for me is critical too. Okay. But this one is really critical. And I think we need to give really, really serious attention to who we're voting for, why we're voting for them, and what we promote to people about the state of this country. And that's what Imagine Freedom is about. It's saying to people, here's the real truth. Here's the truth. And whatever you want to do in your work, you need to start with the truth. Get to the truth. Get to the truth.
I do want to say one thing. I think there's a difference that I see in an allegiance to the system and a fundamental allegiance to God. Yes. And that is where Jesus said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. There are many of us who have decided, I'm no longer going to allow Caesar to be my master. And whoever Caesar is that particular presidential election year, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it just boils down for some of us, like it's getting to a point where it's like, I can't keep signing off on the trauma you are perpetuating in our communities, right? And it's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats too. And
Absolutely.
until we accept that truth, that
Yeah.
yes, the Democrats are traumatizing us, and they
Yes.
have for generations, right? They've
Yeah.
given us crumbs a lot of times, right? They've given us crumbs. So my point is, there comes a point where you got to tell your abuser, you know your worth, and you're not
Right.
going to allow yourself to be abused anymore. And
Right.
so, what does that look like in this election? How do you send a message to the Democratic Party
Yeah.
that no matter what happens in this election, never again will you get away with this, right? And some people don't want to have that conversation because they just want to keep signing off and condoning it. No, you can't keep abusing me and I just keep showing up and allowing you to do it. You're going to pay a price.
No, you've got to have that conversation. And I'm thankful in this cycle. A lot of older people are bothered by the young folk who are saying, okay, the United States is participating in genocide. Oh, the United States and da 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 da. And they don't know how bad that Trump is. No, we all know. We can pretend we don't know that the Democratic Party has given Black folks crumbs for over 100 years. Let's not play that game and pretend that that hasn't happened, because it has. So we need to be about the business also of making people responsible for the havoc they keep reaping in Black lives. We got to have the conversation. We've got to have that conversation. And I'm particularly glad that young folk, basically, especially those who are under 40, are lighting it all up and they're willing to have the conversation. Reverend Rahiel, and y'all see, I'm holding the book up. I love it. It took me 2 days.
2 days?
It took me 2 days to because typically what I do is I've got because I read my books. A lot of people buy books and they don't read books.
Mm-hmm.
I read my books often because I'm doing research or something like that, and I buy the book for the research. But occasionally, I just read a book because I want to read a good book. Okay, it took me 2 days to read this book. And I believe it would be great for a young adult Bible study. A great book for a young adult Bible study. So I want to put that out there, since I know we're looking for your summer reading and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's an easy read. It's laid out in, is it 3 or 4 parts? I forget.
It's 3 parts. It's 3 parts,
Yeah.
and it ends with a love letter to the African diaspora, and it ends with a prayer.
Yeah. It's, so you all can do 3 months actually of Bible study, or three, however you want to do it. But it's a good Bible study book for young people. I think it speaks to their stories, their traumas, in ways that a lot of the junk that we give to young adults does not. Reverend, I can't thank you enough for the book and for your years and your continuous labor.
Thank you.
And so if somebody asks me, what does a freedom fighter look like? I'm showing them your picture.
Oh.
I'm showing them your picture.
Make sure it's a cute picture.
See, that's why I love her. That's why I love her. I'll put Harriet and Frederick Douglass and all of those next to it, but you are a freedom fighter and you got the receipts. And so I thank you for all your work. Thank you for everyone who has tuned in. Before you leave, type in the name of another person. I had 2 amazing guests today, 2 of them. Okay, type in the names of people who really need to check out this broadcast. They can view it. It'll be up for 2 weeks. And then Monday, join me the 29th for Developing Sermons with Raquel Letzum, Dr. Jared Carter, and Dr. Charles Goodman. Thank you for hitting my Cash App. I'm an independent scholar. So by blessing me, you help me to bless you. As I always conclude by saying, share the video. It won't cost you anything. Share the video. Let's bless one another. God bless. You all have a great week. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you so
Take care.
much.